Hello, this is Joe Hildreth, and I am starting a series on how to write extensions for Joomla 3.x. I say 3.x because I think the current release is 3.5. I think the next major release is 3.6. I don't really quite understand the release schedule. But anyway, I am a hobbyist, and I would like to learn how to write extensions for Joomla. I've learned a little bit. This series of videos will replace the current videos that are on my website covering the beginnings of Joomla 2.5. In order to develop for Joomla, we have to have an environment that will allow us to do that. And the very first thing that we need is a web server that will run MySQL and PHP. Now, the system that I'm using here is Ubuntu 16.04. It's a long-term support. It's been out for a couple months now. The only thing that I've done to this system is apply the updates and change the background to a solid color and install just enough software so that I can record the desktop and assemble the videos. So the first thing that we're going to do here is we're going to set up what's called a LAMP server, LAMP, and it stands for Linux, Apache, MySQL, and PHP. In addition to installing LAMP, we'll install phpMyAdmin to allow us some access to the database without having to use the command line tools. So let's get started. The first thing we want to do is open up a terminal, and there's a couple ways to do that. If you're comfortable with Unity, you can click on the search and type in term, and there's terminal, and it will start it up. And there we go. Another way is to use a keyboard shortcut. My favorite one is Control Alt and T. So you see that brings up the terminal too. So I will frequently use that just to save a little time. Okay, so to install LAMP can be easy. It can be hard, or it can be somewhere in between. It just really depends on what you want to make of it. I'm lazy, so I'm going to do it the easy way. And so I'm going to use part of task select that you would normally use on the server software to install. It just so happens that it works on the desktop too. So we're going to sudo apt install LAMP server, and then we're going to put this little caret on the end. This little caret on the end, like I said, is part of the task select process that you would see on server, but this ensures that everything that we need to install to run the Apache web server and MySQL and PHP and everything are all actually installed. So we're going to hit enter here. Of course, you have to put in your sudo password. Okay, and we'll let it go. So it will read a number of packages that it thinks that it needs to install. At this point, you want to hit yes and enter, and then it'll start downloading the packages from the archives. Okay, when now that the software is downloaded and started the install process, the very first thing it asks for is a MySQL root user password. Now, this password is very important, so whatever password you select, make sure that you remember it. If you have to write it down and hide it somewhere, remember where you hide it. But we'll be using this password frequently, and it's important not to share this. One other thing that I want to mention before we get started here is that I'm going to be making some changes to the local LAMP setup here that are probably better to develop because I'm on a machine here that I can have access to everything, but these are not best practices in terms of setting up a web server for that's facing the outside world that you're going to be servicing requests to. So keep that in mind. So we're going to enter in the root password. This can be anything that you want. Like I said, just remember it's important to remember it. And it's going to ask you to repeat that password. Enter the same password. Press enter, and then it starts the install process. one of the things that changed in Ubuntu 14 to 16 is the apt program. You can still use apt-get, but apt, I notice, has all the same functionality, other than it looks like it puts a progress bar, and I don't remember that being available in the apt-get version. Okay, when the software is done being installed, we'll be returned back to the prompt. So we can test our install and make sure that it works. We can open up the browser and we can type in localhost and hit enter. Oops. I hope I've done that in the right spot, eh? And we should have a default Apache 2 web page. So far so good. Let's move on. So the next thing that we want to install is an application called phpMyAdmin. phpMyAdmin allows you to create databases, update and insert data, create tables, and basically anything that you could do in the MySQL command line interface, but it's web-based driven. Now, phpMyAdmin requires a couple of dependencies, and those dependencies are mbstring and getText. The newer version of phpMyAdmin supports multi-byte language strings. So, you know, those languages that have a character set that are larger than the normal 8-bit character set, it could read those. So, in order to install the required software, we're going to issue a sudo apt install, and the two pieces of required software or modules that we need for PHP are php-mb string and php get text. Okay, it will ask you if you want to install it. We're going to say yes, and we'll go through the install process. And again, if this takes too long, I'll edit this out. Okay, that was pretty much painless. So now we can get on to installing phpMyAdmin, and we just issue a sudo apt install phpMyAdmin. Now we could have done all three of these on one line, it would have been fine, but I just wanted to emphasize that the previous two packages that we installed, mbstring and getText, were a requirement of phpAdmin, so that's the only reason why I've done those first. So we'll hit enter here, and it's going to say I need this amount of software downloaded. Yes, I want to do that. Press enter, and we go through this again. And again, if this takes too long, I'll edit some of it out. Okay, when the install process starts, phpMyAdmin can automatically configure to run in a couple of different web servers. So we're going to be using Apache 2, so we're going to select that by pressing the space bar. We're going to tab and hit OK. And so after the software installs, phpMyAdmin needs to configure itself, and what it's asking here is that it can set up a database to handle the phpMyAdmin info, or if you're really good, you can set it up yourself. So we're going to select yes on this here by pressing enter, since it's already highlighted. And then it wants a password that will be registered to use that database. This is a password that phpMyAdmin will use to make modifications to the database. And you don't have to enter one here. If you don't enter one, it'll create a random one. You probably will never need to be in that database. But what I'm going to do is set this password to the same as the root password that I set for MySQL that we done on the LAMP install. So I'm going to enter that password. Tab and hit OK, and then it's going to ask for, to confirm that password. So I'm going to enter it again, hit tab and hit OK. So at this point it should be finishing up the install, and as soon as it gives us our prompt back, which it did, it should be done. So let's go test our work. Let's open our browser back up. We're going to go to localhost / phpMyAdmin and hit enter. And then there we have the login. So the login here, of course, is root, because that's the only user that we so far have for the database server. And then the password is the password that we set up when we installed LAMP, the one I told you to remember, write down, and don't lose. So we're going to enter that password. And there we go. So if we've gotten this far, we're good to go. And we can continue on. So the next thing I'm going to do is here, I'm making a purposeful decision to set up Apache to use virtual hosts. By default, Apache serves its pages in the var www, I think HTML or public HTML folder, and it belongs to Apache. And reading and writing files there as a normal user is kind of tough because we don't belong to that group. And so to make life a little bit easier, we're going to set up a virtual host. Now, virtual host is a way for Apache to look at other web directories as different domains, so you can run multiple web pages on the same server. So to do that, we'll have to have a folder that we're going to use to keep our stuff in. So I'm simply going to create a folder on the desktop. Now I could come over here and say, hey, new folder, and we'll call this xdebug, right? Hit enter, and that would be the end of that. But in case there's some of you out there working just in a console because you've installed server or something like that, I want to delete this folder, and I'm just going to make it through the terminal. So that command is make directory. Okay, and what's the directory I want to make? Well, I'm going to go tilde, which is a shortcut for, in this case, home Joe H, my home folder, / desktop, because I want it on my desktop, and I'm going to call it joomla. So I know that this folder is my Joomla development website, or where I'm storing it. So I'm going to hit enter, and we see that it's popped up here on the desktop. So that part was pretty simple. But now that we've done that, we want to be able to write files and folders in here and allow Apache to make modifications to this folder, but we still have some kind of permission issues. So what we're going to do is we're going to change Apache so that it runs as our user. Okay, and again, this is not a recommended procedure for a production environment. My development server does not sit on the internet serving pages to anyone, so I don't have to worry about being hacked or anything like that. Now, for those of you who are not overly familiar with users and groups, Linux uses the concept of a user and a group and other or world. And when we look at files, if we do an ls-l here, we see over here that we have these groups of permissions. So we know that desktop here is a directory, that the owner, which is Joe H, has read, write, and execute. Okay, the group of Joe H has read and execute, and anybody else would have read and execute on that folder. So the first thing we need to decide is what is our username? How do I know that it's Joe H? Well, a couple ways are if you have a standard prompt, your username is listed right there in front of that @ so I know that it's Joe H. But you can also use a command called who am I, and when you run that command, it will tell you what user you're running as. Okay, and then to figure out what your group is, now by default Ubuntu will put you in a group the same as your name. Now you may have other groups that you're a member of, but by default Ubuntu will create a group with the same as your name. If you're curious, or if you're on a different platform, you can type a groups and then the username and hit enter, and it will say, okay, so user Joe H is a member of phpMyAdmin, cd-rom, sudo, etc. Okay, so the important thing to take away here is that I'm going to use my username Joe H and my group Joe H to make modifications to the Apache server. So the Apache uses a folder called envars, or environment variables, that we need to edit, and we have to do that as sudo. So we're going to sudo, and I want to use an editor called nano. Okay, and the file I want to edit here is an etc apache 2 and then envvars. Okay, and then what I want to look for, scroll down here, is for the line Apache run user and Apache group user. You can see those here. So I'm going to change this from www-data, which is the user that Apache normally runs as, and change that to me. So whenever Apache runs, it's running as my user. And then I'm going to do the same thing for group. The group that I want it to run under is Joe H. And then I'm going to hit Control X and ask me if I want to save the changes. Yes, I do. And where do I want to save them? Well, to the file here that I open. So that was pretty simple. For those changes to take effect, we have to restart Apache. So we'll issue a sudo service. The service that we want to deal with is Apache 2, and we want to restart it. And then we'll get a notification that, well, actually we didn't get a notification, just the prompt come back. So Apache's restarted. So now when we want to write to our folder, this joomdev folder that we created for development, we can write to it, and since Apache is running as us, Apache can run to it, and we avoid a lot of permission issues. Again, let me stress, this is not the proper way to set up Apache if you have a machine facing the outside world. Again, I'm only setting up a development environment, and I'm assuming all the risk. So the next thing that we need to do is we have to set up the actual virtual host for Apache. And by doing that, we have to create a file and place it in a specific location so that Apache can find it. And that file that we're going to create will be, so we're going to sudo nano, so we have to do this as super user, and the file will need to be located in etc apache 2 sites available. Okay, and then the file that I'm going to create, I'm going to call it joom.dev.conf. Now this file can be called anything that you want. Okay, it's probably a good idea to name it something that you can remember or that rings a bell. So when I see joom.dev.conf, I know that this is the configuration file for the virtual site of joom.dev. So hit enter, and then here we need to give it some information. So we're creating a virtual host. Okay, and we're saying that it's going to answer from any IP address on port 80. Okay, now this is a XML file, so we want to make sure that we close these tags. So I like to do that as I go along. So virtual host, close that tag. Okay, and then we need to tell it what is the server name. So our server name will be joom.dev. Now you can create anything that you want, but I just, like I said, I want to be able to type joom.dev in the browser and open this folder up here and read the contents of that folder. So that's the point of the server name. Now we have a server alias. Okay, and the server alias will be www.joom.dev. Okay, and then we need to tell it where it will find its documents for this. So we'll use document root, and it will be located in home. and then my username, Joe H. You have to put your username there on your system, and then it's going to be desktop and Joom Dev. Okay. One thing I want to mention: this file is case sensitive. So if you have any errors, that's where you'll want to look, and we probably will find some ourselves. So the next thing we need is the directory directive here, and we're saying that it's in home, Joe H. You'll use your username there, desktop, Joom Dev. Okay, and while we're at it, since I've opened that directory tag, I want to close that directory tab. Okay, so now inside of this, we're going to specify some additional information. Options, and indexes, and follow some links. Okay, we want allow override all and require all granted. Okay, so that takes care of the directory requirements, and so now we're going to tell it that its log level will be info. Okay, and we say the error log will be located, and we're going to use a environment variable here called Apache logdir, Apache _log_dir. Okay, and from there we're going to store the any errors into joom.dev-error.log. So if we have any errors, that's where they're going to be located. Okay, and then our custom log will be located in the Apache log directory. Okay, in a file called joom.dev-access.log, and this is a combined log. If the point of this tutorial isn't to teach you how Apache works, I'm just giving enough information to set up what we need to do that. So at this point we need to save this file, so we hit Control X and then yes, and then joom.dev.conf is the one that is where I want to save the file to. So now that we have the virtual host file created, we have to do a couple of things to make this work. First of all, Apache has to be able to rewrite URLs. So in other words, when it sees a request for just localhost, it needs to know that it just goes to the default web directory. But when it sees a request for joom.dev, it needs to know that it needs to go to the joom.dev virtual host. So in order to do that, we have to enable a module called rewrite. So we'll sudo a2, so that means Apache 2 enable module, and then the module we want to enable is rewrite, and it tells us that it's enabling it, but in order to activate that configuration, that we have to restart Apache. The other thing that we need to do is enable our virtual site. So we're going to sudo, so it's A2 for Apache 2, right? Enable, and then we want to enable a site, and the site that we want to enable is joom.dev.conf. That's that file that we just created. And again, it tells us for the configuration to take effect that we have to restart Apache. So let's do that. So sudo service Apache 2 restart. Now if everything went well, we shouldn't get any errors. Okay, so it looked like Apache is restarted for us. So the next thing that we need to do is if we had DNS mapping for our domain, we would use DNS, but because we're keeping everything local on this machine, we have to figure out a way to let the machine know what address joom.dev is. So in order to do that, we're going to edit the host file. So we're going to sudo nano, and then the host file is located in etc hosts. Okay, and when we open this up, we're just going to add the line, what's the IP address of joom.dev? Well, it's going to be the local host, right? It's the same machine, so we're going to put 127.0.0.1. Okay, and then we're going to give it the canonical name that we want to use. It's just www.joom.dev, and then we're going to enter in the short name, or just joom.dev. Okay, and then we're going to save this file. Exit, yes. I want to save the buffer, and that's where I want to save. So now if I do an ns lookup to joom.dev, might help if I use the proper command here, ns lookup joom.dev, you see that it returns a local address. It's 127.0.0.1. But okay, so now that we've done that, we have got we've set up we've installed LAMP, we've set up MySQL, we've installed phpMyAdmin, we've told Apache that it's going to run as us, and we've set up a virtual host to point to a folder that's on our desktop that's easy and convenient for us to edit files in. And we have set up name services through the host file so that when we put in joom.dev, it knows where to find it. So now, sorry about that. So now the next thing we need to do is create a simple page. So I'm just going to double click this folder, and I'm going to say I want a new empty document here, and we're going to call this index.html because that's what Apache looks for. And then we're going to edit this file. I'm just going to open it with gedit, and we're going to create a very simple web page here. So HTML, and let's close the tag. I always try to remember to close them because I'm bad about not doing so. And then there's the head of the document, and in the head we have a title, and the title we're going to use is I don't know, my Joomla development server, and that's the end of the title. Okay, and then of course we're going to have a body, and in the body we're going to just put in maybe an H2. We'll call this virtual host test page, and the H2. Yeah, you can put anything you want here. I'm just, and so put a paragraph here. Welcome to your virtual host. Okay. So now we have a very simple web page. We're going to save that, and we'll close that. So the next thing we need to do is test and see if our stuff worked. So let's open up our web browser, and we're going to go to joom.dev. And there we have it. So it shows our virtual host test page, and so we know that when we go to joom.dev, we're going to that folder that we've created on our desktop. Okay, so now we've basically got everything that we need that we can start developing, but there's some things that we can do to make it just a little bit better. Okay, one of the things that we'll want to do is as we're coding in PHP, we want to be able to see any errors that we create. Okay, and so we want to display the errors, and in order to do that we need to make some modifications to the phpINI file. So we're going to edit the phpINI file with sudo nano, and it's located in etc php 7.0 Apache 2, and then php.ini. So this file controls how PHP is set up and run. So what we want to do is we want to look for error reporting and display errors. Now we could scroll through this file, but this is a large file, so we're going to take a shortcut. Nano allows us to search for files by using Control W, or what they call where is. I'll hit Control W, and then I'm going to put in error underscore reporting. I'm sorry. Error reporting space equals, and I'm going to hit enter. So here we see error reporting equals, it's right now eall, except don't show us anything deprecated and don't show us strict. Well, we want the maximum number of errors that we can get, so we're just going to change this from this to just eall. So if there's a warning, a notice, a fatal error, anything, no matter what, we want it displayed and shown to us. Now, in a production environment, you wouldn't turn these on because obviously you wouldn't want your end users to know that, well, like me, maybe you're a crappy programmer, because I'm not a great programmer. Alright, so the next thing we need to do is we're going to hit Control W, and we're looking for display errors. So display underscore errors equals, and hit enter. So right now you see by default they're turned off. We're going to change this from off to on. Okay, so that's the only two changes that we need to make to PHP in order to get them to show them for us. So we're going to hit Control X. Yes, we want to save, and we want to save to phpINI. Now, in order for that to take effect, of course, we need to restart Apache. So we're going to sudo service we want to restart is Apache 2, and restart it. So now if we make an error in our PHP code, Apache will show those errors to us so that we know what to go back and fix. So that's well on our way to seeing problems, but there's more. There's an extension called xdebug, so that when we do make an error, xdebug can show us the flow of the program and where the error occurred. So it makes it a little bit easier for us to trace those errors, and that's very easy to install. We're just going to do a sudo apt install, and what we want to install is php xdebug. And of course, it may or may not ask you to install software. Usually if it's just one package, it doesn't ask you, just does it. So here we are, and then finally to make sure that Apache is using that, we're going to restart the service again. So sudo service Apache 2 restart. Okay, so now that's restarted. So let's go and just take a look, and let's create let's rename this from index.html to index.php. Okay, and let's edit this file. And instead of just putting in some HTML here, let's embed some PHP. So I'm going to come down here and insert a new line. So PHP, and then let's do a PHP info. And close our PHP tag and save that. So now let's go up here and hit F5 and refresh. So now we get our virtual host test page, welcome, and then we get all the information about PHP. So we have confirmed that PHP is running. And if we make a mistake, let's go back over here to our file, and I'm just going to leave off this closing parentheses here and save that. I'm going to come back to our web page. I'm going to hit F5 to refresh. Wait a minute. Parse error, syntax error, unexpected. So we're getting the errors, and then this brightly colored line gives us a trace where we've had the error at. This is xdebug or phpMyAdmin that does this for us. So we have a parse error, we have a syntax error, we have an unexpected semicolon on line 10. So if we come over here, so we see down here, we're on line 10. Oh, okay, I see it. There's a semicolon there, but we didn't finish this out. So hit that, save, refresh, and then you see our error's gone. So you can see how that'll help us. But now there's one little problem. If we go to our joom.dev and go to phpMyAdmin, right? Remember, that's the software that we use to access the database, and hit enter. Ooh, now that is ugly. Well, let's take a look and see what's really going on here. Well, what we see is that phpMyAdmin, the software, is using some deprecated methods. It's making function calls that PHP is saying, hey, we may not support these in the future, so I'm giving this error. Well, we're getting these errors because we turned on all the error function, and this does not affect the way that phpMyAdmin runs. So what we're going to do is we're going to come down here and say, hey, ignore all of these errors, and then we get the login like normal. So let's go ahead and log in. Remember, that's root, and then the password that you gave it, and then we're logged in. So it's ignoring errors, but we should still get errors on our own. So let's double check. So let's remove that parentheses again and save it, and let's open a new tab, and let's go to joom.dev. So we're still getting the error on our work, which is what we want. We don't want to see the errors on phpMyAdmin because we're only using this as a tool to work with the database. Now, here's something else that I need to point out. You notice that we weren't getting this error. The configuration file needs a secret passphrase blowfish secret. We're not going to worry about that because we changed the ownership of Apache and we didn't make the appropriate changes for phpMyAdmin. There's files that it can't read to get this, and that's why we're getting that, but it will not affect what we need to do. So there we have it. We have Apache installed with MySQL and PHP, phpMyAdmin, we have phpDebug installed. So now we have an environment where we can add some more tools and then get Joomla, a base package of Joomla installed, NetBeans, and some other stuff, and we'll move from there. So I hope, I know this has been a bit of a long video. I hope you've enjoyed it. There's more to come. I do want to say that you can go to myheap.com. That's my personal website. And on myheap.com, under technology, you'll see that right now it says exploring Joomla 2.5. This stuff will go away, and I will replace this with Joomla 3.x. And when you go there, you'll find the same series of videos on, in this case, how to install LAMP on Ubuntu 16.4. You'll be able to download a PDF of this web page plus the video that I've just created for this after I've edited it and posted it. So hang with me. It's going to take some time to get these in place. Hopefully this will help people in the long run on how to write extensions for Joomla. So thank you again for watching. Have a great day. If you have questions, you can come to my website and hit contact us and send me an email, or you can post in the comments under the YouTube video. So thank you again for watching, and have a blessed day.